My name is Oddball, and once again I'm going to talk about 3D printed guns because that seems to be a popular topic. And yeah, believe it or not, it's been about 10 years since people have been doing this sort of stuff. And you know, one of these days I'll do a presentation that doesn't need this slide. If you take law advice from some guy named Oddball, yeah, tell the judge that. And you know, all the things, if laws change from state to state, and especially with firearms laws right now after NYSERDA versus Bulan, things have gone kind of insane. The Supreme Court just announced, I think Friday, that they're going to take up another gun case. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there's more to follow. And yeah, so those of you who have been at PhreakNIC for a while probably remember me giving a similar talk 6 years ago. Yeah, I still stand behind this statement. I'm not afraid of 3D printed guns. I don't think anybody else should be particularly worried. Just in case, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you don't recognize this thing, this was the first 3D printed gun, fully printed, other than you can see that there's some screws and a bit of a piece of metal is a little bit of a weight, and actually for legal compliance, which I'll get into in a minute. But 10 years ago, a crazy man decided to actually shoot this on camera and hoping that he kept his hand, which he did. And if anybody's interested, here's all the, here's an exploded diagram of the parts of the stuff. As you can see, you have to get a little bit creative if you're going to do 3D printed springs. Although we were talking earlier, and somebody is actually working on managing to do 3D printed coil springs, which is highly interesting for a number of reasons. If any of you guys have done any material sciences. Incidentally, this was printed in ABS plastic. If you tried to print it out in the PLA of the day, congratulations, you have a grenade. Yeah, don't set off grenades that are in your hand. And a couple others that I showed off at the time. This one is the Songbird, which, again, some crazy man actually decided, you know what would be fun? Let's make a 357 Magnum 3D printed gun. And he fired it multiple times, including after having to reinforce the barrel with some zip ties. Right. For me, when you get layer separation and you're dealing with something, you know, explosives by your hand, that's when I stop.
So that's the line.
Yeah, I may be a little bit of a weenie about that, but personal preference. I like my digits.
50 PMG.
Let's hear. There is a particular gentleman that has been doing prototyping using 3D printed, but Brandon Herrera on YouTube, he's building an AK-47 scaled up to 50 PMG, which there's something not right with him. This was one of the first 3D printed revolvers. I'm sure everyone in the room probably can figure out where this individual got the inspiration for the overall design. And it shot just 22 long rifle, which is a lot easier to contain. but and has some, and if you, does anyone not recognize the overall design of this?
What is it?
Nerf gun, yeah. Especially when steampunk was big, all the steampunkers were buying the Nerf gun that looked like this and painting it and sticking gears on it for their costumes. But it's a good, solid design with lots of reinforcement. So somebody went, wait, I can use that for a real gun. And things started to mature and get a bit more sophisticated and a bit prettier. This was, again, a 22 revolver with a really interesting mechanism that folks went back in history to look at some of the ways early revolvers worked. So instead of using a hand to move the cylinder on the cylinder face, you can see that zigzag pattern there. And that's what a hand would move back and forth on and move the cylinder that way. And you can see, here it is popped open. You can see the 22 rounds stuck in there. Unfortunately, the gentleman that designed this lived in Japan. If you don't know, Japan has severe weapons laws. It is essentially illegal for civilians to own firearms. So after he put up some videos of some of the stuff that he printed out and shot, he got caught and went to jail. So always make sure that whatever you're doing is legal, because I've been told prison is not a fun time. And around the same time, there was also Solid Concepts decided to show off their 3D printing with their metal 3D printer using powder. And they actually printed a 1911 everything except for the springs. And fired, I think, 2,000 rounds through it without breakage. Because especially at the time, there was a thing of you can do metal 3D printing, but it's not going to be strong enough for most purposes. And just if I can contain small explosions, it should be good enough for a lot of needs. And as I was saying, whenever you're doing this sort of thing, you need to make sure that you're nice and legal, because prison is not fun. And the first thing is, yes, homemade guns are mostly legal. There are a couple states, like I think California requires you to register it and serialize it and all that fun stuff. And Massachusetts has a law that you have to have a firearms owner's permit to possess any ammunition components, be that the bullets, black powder, case, whatever. So there's that. And of course, there's the National Firearms Act of 1936. That's where we get the laws saying that you have to have machine guns and short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns and silencers registered with the federal government. You have to pay your $200 tax stamp and wait for 9 months for them to go through the paperwork and all that fun stuff. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with ITAR. If you're not, it is, if you're posting stuff on the internet, chances are it's going across country borders. So the federal government at various points has decided that 3D printed guns and their designs are of military importance. Very much including that Liberator, that first gun that I showed you. A single shot gun that may explode in your hand Yes, that's a military firearm. Okay. And that's just one of those weird ones that a lot of people don't think about. The Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, because people, everybody remember Die Hard 2, the porcelain Glock? Yeah, that didn't actually exist, but Congress thought it did. So they passed a law in '88 saying that there must be enough metal for a firearm to be detected in a metal detector of X strength, yada, yada, yada. And the gun industry went, wait, you're wanting to ban a gun that doesn't exist and we don't think is possible to exist? Okay. We're not going to fight you on this one. And whatever the ATF comes up with this month. As I mentioned earlier, I promised Ben that I'd try not to get too political about stuff. But the ATF has several times told people, oh yeah, that's perfectly legal. Oh wait, no it's not. And we may actually try to put you in jail because you're doing what we told you was perfectly legal. And where does it say it in the black and white law? It doesn't. And there's some stuff like, there's some stuff that is kind of vague in the law, like there's a bunch of things where, okay, it's illegal to have this or anything that's readily convertible to a machine gun or unserialized firearm or whatever. And see, okay, well, what does that mean? And there have been times that the ATF has argued in court that if you have access to a fully stocked machine shop and 8 hours on your hands, that is readily convertible, which if you know what you're doing in a machine shop and you have 8 hours,
3 minutes,
you can build a gun out of anything. It's and with there was another case where it's like, yeah, we took 3 days to try to get this to work and never did, but we're still going to say that, yeah, that was readily convertible and that these people should go to jail for it. And a jury bought it. Specifically with the going back and forth arm braces. There's several letters from the ATF, official stamp head, saying, yes, it's perfectly legal to put an arm brace on a handgun. Anybody not know what I mean when I say arm brace? Everybody knows? Okay, cool.
Can I also point out that most military-grade weapons were actually designed to have arm braces added to them? The
Yes.
Glocks have got a little point in the back, H&Ks, lots of them have specific attachment points.
A lot of them do, yeah. But what was it? Last year they decided, no, arm braces are pretty much illegal because some people are putting them up to their shoulder. And there was a while where it's well, an arm brace is legal as long as you don't hold it a certain way. So if anybody wonders why Firearms Geeks and the ATF don't have the greatest relationship, that's a wonderful example. So one of the things is these are 80% AR blowers. So the idea is, well, it's not a complete AR, you still have to, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. You have to mill out the inside, drill a few holes. And for a long time, the ATF said, yeah, cool, that's legal. You can sell those. And then they started saying, well, you can't sell them if you also sell the person the jig and drill bits at the same time. And now they're trying to say, oh, they're just straight up, no, that's close enough to a firearm. And there's a couple lawsuits going on about that.
Is that the one they call the receiver?
Yes. So this is, with an AR, there's an upper receiver and a lower receiver. And per federal law, any commercial firearm, there has to be a part called the receiver that usually holds the trigger mechanism and the barrel and all that. And that is the serialized part. That is the gun. Everything else is merely an accessory. Which you can swap out everything else, but as long as you have that one piece is what you have to go through a background check to buy, et cetera, et cetera. So now, of course, folks being a little cheeky, one gentleman decided, I'm going to build myself an AK-47 at home with whatever I have in my tool shed. And yes, that is a shovel handle as a buttstock. And he did actually rifle his own barrel, and you can see that he went, well, I don't have pipes quite long enough, so I'll just weld them together.
Nice.
And no, I don't have the proper stamping tools, so I'll just kind of use this piece of square pipe as a guide and and some pliers. And yes, that sledgehammer was used in building the AK.
I'm sure the vodka was too.
The vodka may well have been used as well. It did function. Accuracy was not particularly great.
Specifically, AKs and SKSs were designed to be made or repaired by a village blacksmith.
Yes.
He's right in the...
Yes, and the receiver for the AK, which is this part right here, is meant to be a thin sheet of metal. You cut some holes out and then fold it and stamp it, and that's a real low-tech. Most areas that are vaguely close to modern civilization have that technology to be able to build it. And there are some folks that decided, you know what, since 80% receivers are no-go, we'll go with 0% receivers. This is actually the Ghost Gunner 3, which is a little CNC machine that you can buy from the company that Cody Wilson started. Cody Wilson being the gentleman that printed out that Liberator, that first 3D printed gun. You can buy this from his company, and it comes with the instruction files that you put in a proper dimension block of aluminum. Start it up, walk away, come back a few hours, and you've got an AR lower. And of course, you also then have a CNC machine that you can do anything you want to. Oddly enough, this machine is pretty much specifically banned in California. Because it's advertised specifically for making AR lowers. Of course, when it comes to handmade guns without special tools whatsoever, This is actually a homemade gun. It does use a Sten magazine, but it's a homemade gun with stuff that guy bought at the hardware store. And again, he has a machine shop and knows how to use it. Here's the gun taken apart, and you can see that that's not particularly complicated. And the truth of the matter is, it is much easier to make a machine gun than it is to make a semi-auto. And you can probably identify most of the parts, and you may have a good number of those at home. But you know, with a Dremel and a welding torch, you can make your own machine gun. I wouldn't, because that is a federal no-no, and again, I don't like prison. Oh wait, this isn't a homemade gun. This is the Sten gun. This is what? Yeah, there's an actual Sten gun that was made during World War II. But you can see even the factory manufactured guns don't necessarily have to be terribly complicated. You can probably tell there's not a huge amount of difference between this gun and this guy. And internally even more so. It's a very simple mechanism. Now, there's this guy that is a homemade gun, a homemade machine gun, designed by a man named, his last name is Ludi. He was a Englishman who actually decided when the British passed all of their gun control laws in the 90s, he decided as a protest that he would actually write up a couple how-to manuals and publish them on how to build a machine gun at home.
What prison is he in?
He passed away a couple years ago. I believe he did go to jail for 3 to 4 years, I think. But you can see that it looks fairly nice, and yes, he included how to make a magazine, which, if you don't know much about firearms design, oddly enough, the thing that holds the bullets is the most complicated part in the gun. There's something like 20 different measurements that you have to get right for the feed lips. And a lot of the, it's standard in the industry to, you design the magazine first, and then you design everything else around it, because that is by far the most complicated, and most likely, if you screw it up, that is most likely to cause major malfunctions in the gun. And yeah, his books, PDFs of his books are floating around on the internet. I'll leave that as a homework assignment for you guys to do. Again, remember, prison, bad. And if you're, the guy who built this obviously knew what he was doing in his shop. It looks pretty nice. If you're like me and can't, and don't particularly know what you're doing in the shop, that doesn't matter. This is a working machine gun that that the police found in Brazil off of somebody. I think I might be able to do better weld seams than that.
Keeping the barrel straight.
Details.
Somebody dropped it in the ocean and found it 10 years later.
But again, that is in working state. Things can be very crude. And of course, there's everybody's favorite old school, a zip gun. This particular one is in 410, and they went a little fancy and decided to give it a buttstock and all that fun stuff. But the classic is 12 gauge, and you get the right size
Is that
pipes.
legal?
Is that legal? Yes.
It looks like it's the legal length. So.
Yeah, and yeah, that's one of the big things is with the NFA is make sure that it's the proper length. A shotgun needs to be at least an 18-inch barrel and overall length of 26 inches.
24, 26.
Again, I'm not a lawyer, but so yeah, that is legal. You can absolutely build that at home, assuming, like I said, there, you know, California, you have to serialize it and that sort of thing. But
00001.
but yeah, you can build that at home, and I can guarantee you that everyone in here can manage to build that.
You can build that inside of the Ace Hardware store.
Yes, you are correct. And if you go to certain hardware stores, they'll actually look at you as you're buying the supplies and go, I know what you're doing. It's like when you buy the supplies to build a potato cannon. And speaking of which, by ATF's new rules with the, well, if it's a partially made receiver or easily converted to be, then it's a firearm and needs to be handled such. That means now the biggest firearms dealer in America, Home Depot. Because, yeah, you can buy a couple pipes, a pipe cap, and a nail, and just, you know, thread it together, and congratulations, you have a shotgun. It sucks, but
They do sell the 22 caliber nail drivers still.
yeah.
Drill out the barrel.
So that was 6 years ago. About 6 years ago, oddly enough, about 6 years ago, a lot of things in the 3D printed gun scene changed. And a good part of that is because of this little guy. I hear a couple chuckles. So yeah, if you're into 3D printing at all, you probably recognize this printer. This is the Ender 3. It came out, and the big thing it changed was you can get a capable 3D printer for about $200 now. If you're near a micro center, they're often running a deal where you can get it for $100.
My Ender 3 was $60.
I'm guessing you got it used. You got it new for $60?
It was still in the box, but somebody had opened it and they had looked at it, decided they didn't want to put it
okay,
together,
yeah.
and they took it back.
Yeah.
I got mine 120 maybe.
And before that, you were looking at, for a capable 3D printer, you're looking at close to, you know, $1,000. And now I will say, when I got this guy, and actually both with all my printers in my basement, everybody remember the Father and Christmas story and the sounds coming up from the basement as he was working on the furnace? I've been told that happens often while I'm working on my 3D printers, but this meant that it was super easy for people to get into the hobby at a low price point and get something that worked. And also, so everything that you now see on the internet, chances are, if you go to Thingiverse or whatever and you look up for 3D print files, chances are they're designed with this thing in mind to be printed on. And so it was off to the races, and we were talking about the AR lowers before, and people started not only 3D printing AR lowers, but deciding to have fun with it. Because why not? And they found out rather quickly that the AR lower in particular didn't really see a lot of stress. So it was really easy to play with materials and find out what worked, what didn't. Also around the time that the Ender 3 came out, companies started coming out with what's called PLA Plus, which is a very easy material, which is a material that's pretty much as easy to print as PLA, which is kind of the beginner material to print with. But in a lot of the important matters, it was as strong and resilient, if not better, than the ABS and other materials that people were printing with. That if just a quick show of hands, how many people have dealt with 3D printers before? How many of you guys have used ABS? How many of you guys have sworn at ABS for warping like crazy?
The fumes aren't too bad.
The fumes just make it better, makes you a little bit more relaxed. But PLA Plus, you don't have to deal with the warping and difficulties with bed sticking and making sure that the chamber is at the right temperature and all that fun stuff that you do with ABS. So it was a lot easier for people to start doing this sort of stuff. And they started going, well, we can start doing that for pistols. This is a 3D printed Glock. You can see the layer lines that the frame of the Glock is 3D printed, and it's become very common for people to buy the barrels and slide and the internal mechanisms, print out the frame, and slap it together. Is it as sturdy as the real thing that you buy at a store? No, you still have to deal with layer separation and all that fun stuff. But it'll work, especially if what you're wanting to do is to go to the range and just plink away at it. This guy is one of the pistols that I usually in previous presentations would show as, well, you know, you could go through the hassle of printing stuff and assembling it, yada, 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 or you could go buy this. This is a High Point 9mm. It's probably the best semi-auto pistol that you can buy brand new for under $200. Please spend more than $200. But the 3D printing community, being what it is, looked at this and went, you know what, we can print that.
Wow.
And out of PLA Plus, it's about as pretty. And they actually went, you know what, and the community being the community, the original gun's the high point, we're going to call this the low point.
I call it a midpoint.
And again, like I said, you can see they've reused the slide and the trigger and the internal parts, but the frame, yeah, sure, we can print that. And I was mentioning magazines earlier. The magazines are really tough, and most of the time, folks just go, you know what, just buy the magazines. They're usually inexpensive and easy to get a hold of. Well, folks have started printing magazines. Specifically, usually when you see 3D printed magazines, they're Glock magazines. Because Glock magazines, if you're not familiar, they are chunky boys. They've got real thick walls because Glock back in the 80s decided we're going to make our magazines out of plastic, which sort of worked. And then went, well, let's line it with metal. So modern Glock magazines are basically metal magazines that have then been plasti dipped to get the right thickness. So those work rather well for, now they're still using commercial springs, because springs are, they still haven't quite figured out how to 3D print a coil spring that needs to be the right diameter, etc., and actually be good enough for the material, for the application, and I doubt they ever will, just because of materials. And if you haven't figured out already, the 3D printing community is a little weird. Now, real quick question. Is this a rifle or is this a pistol?
Yes.
Good answer. So it's it's built off of a, yeah, depending on what day it is, and depending, and at this point also possibly depending on what area of the country because of current lawsuits going on. This is either a pistol with an arm brace or a short-barreled rifle, based off of a 1911 pistol. You can see they reused the 1911 slide here, and they actually, there's the 1911, there's the magazine sticking out. Because for some reason people like having magazines in front of the trigger, which I don't understand, but it's not my gun. And also, you know what? We can start adding features to guns. This was designed by a gentleman who goes by the handle Bulan. He has some rather fun things. He decided, you know what my Glock needs? My Glock needs a bayonet that's actually an out-the-front switchblade.
Is it ballistic?
No, it's not ballistic.
It's a nice design.
It is, yeah. And that's one of the things that I like about the Bulan. He has crazy ideas, but he knows what he's doing and makes it look nice. Similarly, again, the Bulan decided, you know what, my 22 revolver just doesn't look futuristic enough. And this is just simply, it's like, here's a Shroud to stick on top of the barrel of the 22, and oh hey, it gives me a nice mount point for an optic, and makes it look sci-fi, because that's fun. As I said, the 3D printing community isn't always right in the head. Yes, that is fully functioning. I think that any cop in the nation would probably consider that as reasonable cause for suspicion. But, because, yes, ladies and gentlemen, remember, throughout the entire country, smoking pot is still a federal crime, no matter what the state says. And the ATF doesn't really care what your state says.
Now, does the gas return light your weed?
I do believe they're actually separate systems, but you know, and they've also figured out that, hey, we can print entire firearms that actually look like decent firearms. This is, I believe they actually call this one the Beach Sparrow instead of the Desert Eagle. And it's actually a 22 pistol instead of, you know, if you're not familiar with the Desert Eagle, watch any action movie from the 80s to today, and chances are the Desert Eagle is in there. It's that giant hand cannon pistol that everybody carries.
Does it float?
Does it float? I don't know. Now, probably not, because one of the things that they quickly found out is, and I don't think anybody's tried to back down on it, is if you want to print a 3D printed gun, the stuff that you're printing is 100% infill. So all that plastic is just solid chunks of plastic. Yeah, especially when you're dealing with prototyping, who cares about what the colors are? This is actually a 12 gauge revolver shotgun. And as you can see, he did, for the cylinders, he did insert pipes, steel pipes for it. Because in most cases with 3D printed guns, guys have quickly decided, yeah, plastic barrels work, but they work once or twice. And I like my digits. And
For a shotgun, 3/4 inch plumbing pipe works really nicely.
exactly, yeah. And then there's this guy, the FGC9, the F Gun Control 9. Completely 3D printed except for the barrel and the magazine spring and some screws. And actually the gentleman that designed this and released it also released instructions on how you can rifle a barrel at home, I believe using electrolysis.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is another one of those legal things of unless you're making a shotgun, the barrel has to be rifled. Which again, if you're using a plastic barrel, it might be rifled when you pull it off the printer. After that first or second round goes through, I'm pretty sure you got a smoothbore. Yeah, and you know, a modified AR lower using Glock magazines that, and like I said, all of that's 3D printed except for a couple small pieces in the barrel. And actually, this has, this has actually been successful enough that this is a Revol in Miramar actually using one of these things. Now, that said, from what I understand, the Rebels have mostly been using them for obtaining better firearms.
Is he missing a finger?
No, I mean, things happen.
In the US we do too.
That's right. But it's if you had told me 6 years ago that there would actually be vaguely military forces using 3D printed firearms for anything, I would have called you a liar. But and of course the 3D printing community being the 3D printing community, you can do whatever you want. You can add lettering to it. You can make it pretty. And this is actually at a competition for 3D printed guns. I think they've done it for 3 years now, where hobbyists show up with and there's various categories for, okay, if you did the build kit where you printed out the receiver, oh, you actually made your entire gun, okay, you come over here. And of course, like anything, a good bit of it is okay, did your gun actually survive the entire competition? It did? Awesome. And again, we get into the fully 3D printed guns. This is actually a 3D printed MP5. Including it actually holds the roller delayed lockback system, which is, yeah, that's complicated stuff. Doing straight blowback's one thing, but this actually has moving parts. Yes, the HK SNAP. It does the HK SNAP. And if anybody wants to get a song stuck in your head, look up the HK Slap by Print, Shoot, Repeat on YouTube. Hilarious guy that does 3D printed gun stuff. And okay, this is great for pistol caliber stuff, but we can start moving on to fully 3D printed rifle caliber stuff. I believe this model was called the Dolphin. You can probably see why. But this is a fully 3D printed AR. Again, minus the barrel and some internal bits. It is actually surprisingly robust. I've seen guys put these through torture tests, like chucking them around and doing pull-ups on them and stuff like that.
Is that folding stuff? It looks like a hinge.
No, that is a hose clamp, or not a hose clamp, not zip tie, the metal ones, and
Yeah,
brains.
it's quick clip.
Yeah, okay. Some mad lads decided, let's get bigger.
Nice.
This is a 3D printed SetMe, which is in a 308 cartridge, which is pretty powerful stuff. And there were a lot of folks when the gentleman started coming out with this that were going, no, don't do that. That's not going to end well for you. And it runs, and the guy still had enough fingers to type back messages afterwards, so what could go wrong? But no, it runs just fine. Shows that there's a lot we can do with it. So, say you're looking at these and you're not a gun geek like me, and you're not really into 3D printing, and you definitely don't want to get near something that you've 3D printed that's supposed to hold an explosion near your face or in your hand, which I'm not going to argue with you on that. I'm fine with you making that decision. But why should you care about what's going on with this stuff? First and foremost, censorship. The US government did try to stop Cody Wilson and others from distributing the code for the Liberator pistol. At home, I have a book with it printed out. And I'm kind of the opinion that if I can print it out on a sheet of paper, that should fall under the First Amendment, and I should be able to do that. And those of us in the room that are old enough to remember the 90s and the encryption stuff, this should sound familiar.
Still have a free Zimmerman shirt.
Nice. But it's one of those things of censorship is censorship. And if you let them censor in one spot, oftentimes they go, well, we can also ban this other stuff. And what I definitely consider overbearing laws, to the point that if you're going to get into 3D printing, it might affect you whether you're ever wanting to touch a firearm or not. It's like I said, the state of California already has a law in the books saying, well, you can't buy a CNC machine or a 3D printer if it's advertised that you can print a gun on it, or if its primary design is to print guns. So, well, what does that mean? And especially the advertised. So if someone says you can print a gun on an Ender 3, does that count? And just recently, the state of New York, they are currently discussing a bill to make it so that if you want to print, if you want to buy a 3D printer that is capable of printing a firearm, or firearms part, which is every one of them that's on the market, you have to go through the state's firearms background check, which state of New York gives, that might mean they may get back to you in 15 full business days, which, remember, when the government says full business day, that doesn't count the day that you start, and that doesn't count the day that you pick it up. So that's 17 business days.
Doesn't count Sundays.
And it doesn't count weekends
Holidays.
or holidays. So it might mean that you go into Micro Center and you try to buy a 3D printer, and, well, we'll let you know when we hear back from the state. And you might be able to pick up your 3D printer sometime that month.
You can print your printer faster.
Right. Also, and the way it's worded, I'm pretty sure that would also include ordering it and having it shipped into the state of New York. And also, and the retailer has to keep the records like they were selling firearms. trust me, nobody that's selling 3D printers, unless if they're already a firearm shop, is going to do that. Which would also make it very interesting for all the other industries that use 3D printers, for prototyping, for dental work, for the medical industry. So it's kind of a big thing. And of course, all of us are IT geeks in here. We know that legislatures don't necessarily know what they're doing when they pass laws. That very much goes in full force with firearms laws as well. Oh, and also New York is one of the places that has gone, yeah, I know the law says that we're supposed to respond within this time frame. What are you going to do, sue us? And the last thing is, unfortunately, going after 3D printers and trying to control 3D printed guns is not going to stop bad people from doing bad things, especially with firearms. Like I said, it's super easy to make them. And one unfortunate example happened 2 years ago. An individual decided that he really wanted to assassinate the former Prime Minister of Japan. And so he built a homemade, homemade shotgun and made his own gunpowder and just used ball bearings at his home. And like I said, this was in Japan. Japan has extremely strict weapons laws. You have to have a license to own a sword, and owning a gun is just no. Here's a picture of it without all of that tape wrapped around it. You can see this is not exactly elegant.
Electrical.
Solenoid?
Yeah, he used an electronic trigger.
2 9-volts.
It's a pretty crude thing, but it did the job. I'll end on a honorable mention, which is 3D printing is definitely getting into warfare. These are mortars that the Ukrainians are printing out, stabilizing fins, and then taking $1,000 commercial drones and dropping them on Russian troops. Folks that know better than me have informed me that those Russian mortars really weren't much good, but using it in that but dropping it from a drone after attaching stabilizing fins actually works quite well. And we're starting to see the same thing happen. Hamas is using it on hand grenades and dropping them on Israelis. So whether we like it or not, this is reality. I'm about out of time. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to talk to folks out in the hall. And if you want me to get more political with you tonight and after a couple drinks, I'll be happy to do that too.
Thank you.